On September 11th, 2001, I'd been living in New York City for about a year and a half, and I was living in Prospect Park, Brooklyn, just across the East River from Lower Manhattan. And I worked in Lower Manhattan at a law firm, and I worked in a building at 180 Maiden Lane, which is a distinctive building in that it's an octagonal, deep green, and typically in movies, whenever they show a shot of Lower Manhattan, it's not the tallest building, but it's almost always there. And we were on the 17th floor, and it's also notable in that it's walled entirely in glass, so you can always see outside. So that morning was, as many people have remarked, an incredibly beautiful morning, and I took the subway to work, and I came out of my apartment in Brooklyn and went downstairs and walked to the subway, and as I did, I looked up and we could see a trail of black smoke coming from the city direction. We didn't think anything of it, went down, got on the F train, and took that into my stop, the World Trade Center, and got off at the A stop at the World Trade Center. And when I came walking up out of the stairway and looked up, both towers had been hit. And just before the train had gone under the East River to get to the World Trade Center, it had come briefly above ground in Brooklyn before it goes under into Manhattan. And we had seen that one of the towers had been hit, and someone had mentioned that a plane had hit it, but no one really thought much of it. No one ever really remarked on it. We thought it was a stray pilot or something, but by the time I came up out of the stairway, both towers had been hit, and there were thousands of people standing and looking at them and looking up. I turned and went down Maiden Lane and went down a couple of blocks to my office at the firm at 180 Maiden Lane, and went up to the 17th floor. And at that point, it was probably close to 10 o'clock, and I called my wife, who worked in Midtown, and asked her to meet me at the A stop right in front of the World Trade Center so we could take the train back into Brooklyn. And it turns out she was never able to come down, but she's okay, thank God. But most of all, I was concerned about getting back to Brooklyn because my daughter Gabrielle had been born on September 26th, 2000, and was about 11 months old, 2 weeks shy of her first birthday. And she was at home, and I just needed to get back to her and wanted to get back to her. And so I then called my mom in Massachusetts and said, "Mom, I'm here, but I'm leaving, and we're headed home, and everything's fine." And with that, I hung up the phone, and I walked into my boss's office, and she said, "Great, we're all heading out." And with that, the entire building started to shake. And I looked out the glass wall from the 17th floor, and you could see down Maiden Lane where it empties into the South Street Seaport, and there were thousands of people running in a full sprint, and then clouds, massive clouds of dust. And we didn't really know what was going on other than the building was rumbling, and it was terrifying. And so we gathered everyone up to make sure everyone was okay, and the elevators weren't working, so we went down the fire escape, all of us. There was probably 50 to 75 of us maybe, and a few people stayed behind, a few of the partners, but we went down, and when we came out into the foyer of the building, again, it's walled entirely in glass, so you can see out, but you couldn't see out at all. It was gray in every direction. You couldn't see the buildings across the way. You couldn't see the sidewalk. And after about 10 minutes of that, it gradually lightened, and all I could think was I needed to meet my wife at the subway stop. So I went outside, but I couldn't breathe so quickly. There was so much dust in the air. So I went back in, and I took off my shirt, and I wrapped it around, and I made a mask, and I walked back up Maiden Lane to Broadway. And the rumbling had been the first tower falling and collapsing. And I stood there on that corner, and at that point, most people had gone. The only people there were firemen and police officers, and I was standing looking at the one building that was still standing. And another of the thoughts that I had was, this looks like a war zone. There was a probably 3 to 4 inches of dust and broken glass just in the street. And it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And I was standing there looking at the building, waiting for my wife to hopefully come up out of the stairwell. And all of a sudden, I heard and saw, boof, boof, and that building started dropping. And I turned and sprinted and started running as fast as I could back down Maiden Lane. And the police and firemen, everybody was running. A fire truck went by me going away from the building. And don't get me wrong, the firemen were going into the building just before that. They were the only ones who were. And quickly, within 10 seconds, I became overcome with dust. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was in a fire. I just couldn't breathe, and it became black, and I was lucky I went into a building, a glass door, a revolving door, and got inside, and again was in a foyer with glass at either end, and there was about a dozen of us in there, and police and firemen, and at either end at the glass doors, it got completely black, pitch black, and the phones weren't working, and we couldn't see outside, and that's the one time that I've prayed in my life. And I prayed that I could get home to see my daughter, that I could get back to my daughter, because the scariest part was that we had no idea what was going on. I didn't know if the Trade Center had just fallen on us. I didn't know if other buildings were going to fall. I didn't know what was going to happen. And it was terrifying. And I thought, I've got to get home for my daughter. And we waited, and we waited. And after about 20 minutes, gradually that lightened. And I was able to get out, and it was light enough to get out, and it was about a mile to my house, and I ran in my suit and tie and completely covered in dust and ran the mile and got home, and my daughter was okay, thank God, and my wife was okay, thank God, and I didn't lose anyone in particular that day, but a lot of people that I worked with lost people, and it was the worst day of my life. And I speak carefully, or I try to be, or if not carefully, at least respectfully, and there's a reason for that. Shortly afterward, I started law school. I enrolled, and we moved to Massachusetts, and where I'm from originally, and I went to law school, and I graduated, and I started at a law firm. And during the interview, during one of the interviews, I was sitting around the table with the partners. There was probably 9 or 10 of us in the room, and someone asked about 9/11 or brought up 9/11 or something to that effect. Might have even been me. And I then told my story, and I told it in a way that made me, I don't know, maybe the hero of it. It wasn't that different from how I just told it, but it was very sort of self-centered. And when I finished, one of the partners had lost his son that day, and he was on the American flight, and I felt awful, and appropriately so. And one of the things that it taught me is that everybody lost something that day, and it's not about me. It's about moving forward together, and so when I do speak of that day, I try and do it as carefully as I can, out of respect for the people that were lost, and as well for the people who lost someone that day.